Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So, I don't see anybody here at the moment, but I guess I will just talk about what I want to cover tonight, and then I'll get into it, and hopefully, a lot of people will see it on the recording if they don't get a chance to tune in live. So, again, this is a bitter pill where we talk about bitter pills of truth that people may not want to hear, and that the corporate media and capitalist governments all over the world, especially those kinds of governments, don't want us to know about. So, there are a couple of things I wanted to talk about tonight. One is the ongoing war crimes by the state of Israel against the Palestinian people, particularly, but not only in Gaza, and whether or not, according to standard definitions of genocide, they meet the definition. In other words, that Israel is committing genocide right now, as many people have been saying. And the second thing that I want to talk about tonight is the phenomenon I've observed a lot on Twitter/X recently, on social media, where Westerners of Jewish descent seem to be convinced that they are the victims, that they are the ones under threat of violence. And although, granted, there's certainly anti Semitism in the world, these folks typically A, conflate that with criticism of the government of Israel, B, they exaggerate the extent to which they personally or other Western Jewish Westerners are under threat from it, and see they completely downplay and minimize what Arab and Muslim people, and particularly people who live in Palestine, are facing right now. And the third thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the flip side of that, where there are an awful lot of Jewish people involved in organizing anti-war protests that you see popping up all over the place in response to Israel's actions in the aftermath of the October 7th military operation by Hamas. Anyway, so let's get into the first topic, that of what exactly is genocide, and is Israel committing genocide right now? And also, have they done it before? Has this, or for that matter, has the past 75 years been kind of a slow genocide, at times faster, but meeting the criteria of genocide? So, first of all, let's take a look at how the United Nations defines genocide. Okay, these guidelines on what constitutes genocide were published by the United Nations General Assembly way back in 1948, which coincidentally is the year that Israel was founded. So December 9th, 1948, entry into force 12th January 1951. Okay. So the contracting parties confirmed that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law, which they undertake to prevent and to punish. Article 2, here's the definition. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. So remember, it says any of the following. It doesn't have to be all of them. A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Okay, so it's not just directly killing people that constitutes genocide according to the UN, but causing harm and creating conditions of life calculated to bring about the group's physical destruction in whole or in part. So let's see what Israel's actions, how Israel's actions square with that definition. Okay, well, first of all, maybe I should talk about what led up to all of this, just to kind of review, even though most of you have heard it before. So on October 7th, 3.5 weeks ago now, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other groups of militants from Gaza, which is the tiny strip of land approximately 5 miles wide by 20 miles long. You do the math if you use the metric system. In the southwest corner of Palestine. So bordering Israel on the east, bordering the Mediterranean Sea on the west, Lebanon on the north, Israel on the north, and on the east, and Egypt on the south border. And there are approximately 2.3 million people living in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. And so on October 7th, a group of approximately 2,000 fighters, mostly from the group Hamas, which also happens to be the elected government of the Gaza Strip, elected back in 2006, and there hasn't been an election since then there. But anyway, so they're like the elected government, as well as having the largest militia group in Gaza. And they launched a surprise attack across the boundary with Israel. They cut through the boundary fence in several places, bulldozed their way through, and attacked and took over an Israeli military base, as well as a number of, I think maybe a dozen, I'm not sure, maybe more, settlements that sort of ringed around the boundary between Gaza and Israel, and some other military checkpoints and so forth. And this operation had been very meticulously planned for a couple of years now, and the main objectives, according to Hamas leaders, were to inflict major damage on the Israeli military, which they were able to do that because they took the Israeli military completely by surprise. And secondly, to capture hostages or prisoners, primarily Israeli military, to use them as leverage to exchange prisoners. There were, as of October 7th, approximately 5,000 Palestinians, mainly from the West Bank, which is the part of Palestinian territory that is kind of like Bantustan's that you had back in apartheid South Africa, where there's little pockets of territory in which Palestinians live, and they're surrounded by military checkpoints and illegal Jewish settlements and so on and so forth. Very, very tightly controlled by the military. It's under military occupation. But anyway, so approximately 5,000 Palestinians rotting away in Israeli prisons, more than 1,000 of them without any criminal charges, not even accused of any crime, just held there in what Israel calls administrative detention. And most of the rest were people who basically were suspected of resisting the Israeli occupation in some way. Some of them had committed violent acts, such as killing Israeli soldiers or whatnot. But again, as I've talked about on the show before, under international law, people under military occupation have the right to resist, including the right to resist with violence if they so choose. But in any case, so my point is, most of the people being held in Israeli jails, either hadn't committed any crime, or their crime, so to speak, was one of, often in a non-violent way, or minimally violent way, such as throwing rocks at occupying soldiers or settlers and whatnot. They hadn't committed any major crime, but were being held in Israeli prisons anyway. So Hamas's objective was to capture mainly soldiers, but they also captured some civilians to use as leverage to gain the release of those prisoners. And they captured approximately 200, I believe, of which approximately 150 were military. And in the few weeks since then, Israel has really clamped down on the West Bank, and they've taken several thousand more Palestinians into custody, typically without any charge, or their charge was some form of resistance, usually nonviolent, to the Israeli occupation. So anyway, in the course of Hamas et al.'s military operation, there were civilians killed. So something like 350 military folks killed, and at least according to the Israeli government, which I don't know if I trust their figures or not, about 1,000 civilians. And the claim has been that these were all people killed by Hamas. In reality, I don't want to go into this in detail, but according to eyewitness accounts from Israelis, in reality, there was an exchange of fire between the Palestinian fighters and the Israeli military. So many civilians were killed in the crossfire. And in addition to that, Israel engaged in shelling and airstrikes against both settlements, Jewish settlements, and Israel's military base. The reason being that they wanted to expedite the recapture of these places, and they were willing to put their own citizens at risk in order to do that. And many of them were, in fact, killed. But certainly we can't deny that there were some atrocities against civilians on the part of the Palestinian fighters. But there's a big difference between that and at that scale and what Israel has been doing since then, and what it's done in the past. So I don't have a graphic handy, but somebody put together a graphic of the number of Palestinians versus Israelis killed or injured in the Israel-Palestine conflict over the past 15 years or so. I think it was from like 2008 to 2020, and the casualty figures that they looked up were something like 5,000 Palestinians dead versus 150 for Israel over the last however many years, 15 years, and about 100,000 Palestinians versus way less than that, like in the low 1,000s injured on Israel's side. So where was I going with this? Oh, anyway. So, anonymous comments. Hamas was created by Israel, which he or she calls is not real anyway. So Hamas may be still working for is not real. Well, I mean, I think that they're doing the best they can to break out of the prison that Israel has put Gaza's 2.3 million people in, where they're not allowed to leave without special permission from the Israeli government, and even people with serious medical conditions are often denied permission to leave. And in addition, it's much worse now, but even prior to all of this, Israel was strictly limiting shipments into Gaza of food, water, medicine, etc., basic necessities of life. And in addition, periodically engage in on a somewhat smaller scale, but still a large scale, mass bombing of Gaza, killing many people, causing many injuries, causing huge amounts of destruction to civilian infrastructure. So one of the reasons that Gaza is dependent on international aid to have drinking water, which they don't get enough of anyway, clean, fresh drinking water. But a reason they're dependent is that Israel bombed all the water treatment plants in Gaza, and so anyway. Okay, let me focus on the central issue here. Is what Israel is doing, or perhaps what they've been doing in the past, consistent with that definition of genocide that I quoted to you? So, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. They haven't done D. We know that. Palestinians have a very high birth rate, which is typical of populations that live in extreme poverty. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, haven't done that unless prison is another group, because there's hundreds of children in Israeli jails. Okay, well, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Well, I mean, since 2006, when Israel withdrew its troops and settlements from Gaza, they set up a blockade around Gaza, strictly limiting what could come in either across the boundary with Israel. I'm not calling it a border because it's not an internationally recognized thing. It's violation of international law. Basically, everything Israel is doing to encroach on Palestinian territory. But anyway, limiting what comes in from Israel, which doesn't necessarily mean Israel gave it to them. It's typically international aid agencies or what have you that are sending stuff in. Limiting the amount of electricity and fuel that Gazans have access to. Limiting imports of food and water, and it's doing that both on the across from Israel as well as through Egypt and the sea. So Palestinians can't even go out fishing off their own coast because an Israeli warship might shoot at them. And they can't leave Gaza without special permission, as I said. So basically, they're in an people have called it an open air prison, or perhaps a very large concentration camp. But what have they been doing since October 7th? They have been carpet bombing every place in Gaza. They have completely cut off supplies of food, water, fuel, electricity, medicine. I think that's everything. Everything you need to live, basically, can't get in to Gaza, other than the tiny trickle from international aid agencies. It's a tiny fraction of what they typically get imported on a daily basis, allowed in. So Israel, in other words, is starving them and inflicting conditions that are likely to lead people to die of thirst and disease. So even if we take away the bombing, even if we just pretend that the bombing is not happening, don't you think that right there is genocide? I mean, starving people. When has this happened in history? Somebody was trying to tell me earlier today that, when have you heard of a country that's at war, giving its enemy food and so forth and so on? Well, guess what? Under international law, you are not allowed to prevent a population where you're at war with the military of their country or their group or what have you. You're not allowed to prevent them from eating. You're not allowed to cut off their supplies of basic things they need to live. Who has done that in the past? Well, not very many countries that have gone to war have done that to countries they're at war with, but certainly Nazi Germany did. And now Israel's doing it. So even set aside the bombing, inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, starving people and depriving them of water is as clear an example of that as you can get. Okay, well, what else is Israel doing? Okay, where's my genocide folder? Okay, here we go. Okay, one of the groups protesting against Israel's actions over the last few weeks is Jewish Voice for Peace, an American group of Jews organizing toward Palestinian liberation and for Judaism beyond Zionism here in the United States. So they say this is what genocide looks like. These are the 2,913 Palestinian children killed by the Israeli military this month, as of Thursday, October 26th. And this is a list of the names of all the children in this case, but they also had a list of all the adults killed by Israeli bombs over the past few weeks. And I believe the overall list was about 7,000 people, and this was on October 26th, so 5 days ago. Let's see. Do I have the whole list? No. But anyway, since that day, there have been a couple thousand more people killed. So just today, Israel bombed a refugee camp, Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. More than 400 Palestinians were killed just in that one action. So similar number of people killed as when they bombed the hospital a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, a little over a week ago, which I talked about on the show. And again, you can't argue that this is self-defense, as some people have tried to argue. Oh, Israel's just defending itself. No. It was alleged that there was one leader of Hamas in the refugee camp. Who knows? Maybe true, maybe not. But you can't justify killing 400 civilians, presumably almost all civilians, to kill one guy. And they also, it appears, bombed a different refugee camp. I just now noticed that apparently there's been another refugee camp that they hit. So these are people in refugee camps in Gaza that they already were, or rather their ancestors, their parents or grandparents, great grandparents or whatever, were made refugees in 1948 when Israel was founded. And they were pushed off their land somewhere over in Israel, somewhere nearby, into Gaza, and were refugees there. And there have been generations of refugees ever since. And in addition, Israel's bombing campaigns in Gaza over the last few years. There was one in 2009, there was one in 2014, and there was one in 2021 that inflicted major casualties. Thousands of people total killed, and massive destruction to the infrastructure in Gaza. And because of the blockade, they're not even able to rebuild houses because they're not allowed to import concrete. And so it's just like, it still looks exactly the same way as it did when Israel bombed them to begin with. But according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, which in figures they published in the past, their figures have lined up with figures on people killed and injured and so forth with international organizations such as the UN. So even though the Palestinian Ministry of Health is part of the Gaza government, where Hamas is the party that's in political power. There's just doctors and public health officials. They're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. And if you look at this destruction that's taken place in Gaza, you can easily see, it makes sense that there were that many people killed. So right now, the official total is 8,525. I'm not sure if, let's see. Oh, this was 8 this morning. So I think the bombing of the refugee camp was several hours later. So we're probably up to 9,000 killed, approaching 4,000 children killed, since October 7th. And that's not counting a couple thousand more who are missing, and presumably they're buried under the rubble and they've been killed. So we're talking 6-figure casualties right now just in terms of deaths. More than 10,000 people probably killed, and another 100 plus in the West Bank, and tens of thousands of injuries. Approximately half of all the houses and apartments in Gaza have now been destroyed. So most of the population has, or at least half of the population has no place to live. Many others have become refugees because they were fearful for their safety, given the intense bombing campaign. And you're kidding yourself if you think that fleeing to the south of the country makes you safe if you're a Gaza resident. So that refugee camp that was bombed today, I believe, was in the southern half of Gaza. I can't remember if I said this, but Israel claimed that it wanted everybody in the north of Gaza, which is where most of the people live. The largest city, Gaza City, is in the north, several 100,000 people. And, Israel claimed, well, we're going to bomb in the north because we're going after Hamas and we're preparing the way for a ground invasion. So if you want to live, you need to flee to the south part of southern half of Gaza. And we'll provide humanitarian corridors where we won't bomb, so you'll be safe. Well, guess what? Israel lied. Imagine that. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, 40% of those killed were, at the time they were killed, in the south part of the Gaza Strip, the area that Israel claimed it was safe from their bombing campaign, which their bombing campaign is probably hardly affecting Hamas at all, because, as I've talked about on the show before, Gaza has a network of underground tunnels dug very deep underground that rivals many large subway systems in terms of the amount of mileage. And Israel's bombs cannot reach the vast majority of these tunnels. So, in other words, Israel is carpet bombing, all over Gaza, and overwhelmingly, the people who are being bombed are civilians, and Israel knows that perfectly well. So you tell me, 10,000 people killed in less than a month, a little over 3 weeks. The overwhelming majority of them civilians. You tell me, is that an act of genocide? Cutting off food and water completely, as well as other basic life necessities. After you had already for many years restricted them to the extent that people couldn't, they were barely able to survive, let alone make a living and a life for themselves, and they weren't allowed to leave. Is that not genocide? I don't know how you can argue otherwise. So what Israel wants to do, and they've said this out loud, they've not tried to hide it, is they want to push every resident of Gaza, all the Palestinians in Gaza, into the um, desert in Egypt. They want to push them out of Palestine entirely and take over the land again. Settle it like they had. They had settlements there prior to 2006. And, that now they want to make it all of Gaza. So uh, no bones about it. No hiding it. They have said outright they want to engage in ethnic cleansing, which that's another dimension of genocide. But again, about those figures, think about what um, you know, uh, 10,000 or so, including the people who were killed and haven't been found yet, over a period of 3.5 weeks. Do the math on what that comes out to if this keeps up over the course of a year. And bear in mind, the vast majority of casualties so far are from the bombing itself. We're not taking into account, limiting people's supplies of food and water and so forth. Obviously, if nothing happens in terms of the international situation, Israel is allowed to continue starving people in Gaza, they're going to kill everybody, right? 2.3 million people, which that would rival the Holocaust. Presumably they won't get away with that, but let's say they're able to keep up their bombing campaign at this rate for an entire year. We're talking, a couple 100,000 people killed, something like that. That certainly rivals many genocides in the past in terms of, number of people killed. And, obviously just directly killing people is not the only thing Israel is doing. So, in short, the verdict, yes, they are committing genocide. And there's no excuse for it. You can't say, well, Hamas started it. Oh, they're just trying to get the terrorists, blah, blah, blah. Oh, bullshit. They know exactly what they're doing. They know they are trying to wipe out people in Gaza or make them leave. They're a choice, I guess. If they make it safely to the border and are allowed across into Egypt, which currently they're not being allowed out, well, they can do that, or they can stay there and die. Those are their choices. Those are their options. Anonymous points out in another comment, Israel started the invasions and is not real. They say started the invasions and massacres of Palestinians in 1948 in the Yassin massacre, in which hundreds of Palestinians were killed. The year 1948, which is the year Israel was founded, was one in which Israel's actions were certainly arguably genocidal then as well. They carried out a number of massacres in 1948 that killed dozens or hundreds of people. I think the death tolls I've seen are something like 5,000. And about 750,000 people were kicked off their land, and Jewish settlers, Israeli settlers, stole their land and resources from them, and they became refugees. So mass ethnic cleansing and kind of a low level but very brutal genocide. Okay, well, what do Western Jews think about all this? Well, there are two camps, basically. We have, on one hand, Zionists who support Israel uncritically, totally unwilling to criticize anything Israel does. And then the others are, if they're politically inclined, they oppose the Israeli government. They're anti-Zionist. And what I've seen recently is a phenomenon that I kind of like to call Zio-DARVO, DARVO among Zionists. So if you're not familiar with the term DARVO, it's an acronym for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. So it's very often used by um, domestic abusers who deny that they're doing anything wrong, and whatever harm they cause to the victim, typically a man harming a woman, they blame her for it. And just in general try to gaslight the victim about the reality of the situation. That didn't really happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So um, there are many more examples like this guy, but this guy seems to top the charts in terms of out of this world narcissism. And he says, I am an assistant professor at Columbia Business School. And, of course, this is a Jewish person. I am a father, a husband, an uncle, and a son. I am a 40-year-old man. And last week I found myself crying in front of a group of complete strangers. In a video that has since gone viral, I stood on Columbia University's main campus and pleaded with my employer to protect me and help me protect the thousands of Jewish students whose lives and safety have been entrusted to us by worried parents all across the United States. I pleaded with my employer to help me protect the lives of thousands of Jewish students from pro-terror student organizations who openly laud Hamas, an internationally recognized terrorist organization. I pleaded with the presidents of colleges and universities all around the country to take a clear moral stance against rape and torture and the kidnapping of helpless civilians, provided, of course, that they're Jewish. Doesn't matter if that happens to Palestinians, which, the IDF and Israeli police engage in rape and torture and kidnapping of helpless civilians constantly, but this guy doesn't care about that. I pleaded with colleges and universities to live up to their stated mission of humanism and enlightenment. I pleaded and still plead because the silence of college presidents all across the country is deafening. I am not tenured. I could be fired for this. But if my research into behavioral psychology has taught me anything, it's that looking back on my life, I am more likely to regret not taking this stance. Blah, blah, blah. My children may be American citizens, but through their mother and me, they are Israelis too. Okay, so this guy's got dual citizenship. And because they are Israelis, because they are Jews, I fear for them. Blah, blah, blah. So, he's afraid that, living in New York in the United States, he and his family are going to be targets of violence because he alleges anti-Semitism. Okay, so he goes on and on and on in this vein. Like 30 tweets long. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just an entitled narcissistic douchebag, basically. So my comment was, a 30-tweet thread about how you supposedly feel threatened or unsafe, while meanwhile thousands of Palestinians have been murdered and Israel is trying to starve them to death. Jesus fucking Christ. I'm a whiny narcissist who can't bring himself to condemn genocide would have been much more succinct, I said. Because, I checked out this guy's timeline. He's never, ever, ever said anything sympathetic toward Palestinians being harmed by Israel, not once. And again, granted, it's tragic what happened on October 7th, and in the days after that, where some of the harm to Israeli civilians was done by Hamas and Palestinian and Islamic Jihad and so forth, either through rockets or I guess there were some eyewitness accounts of deliberately shooting people, as well as shooting people or shooting into crowds on the part of the Palestinian fighters. But the majority of them didn't do that. And as I said, eyewitness accounts, including from the Israeli military, verify that probably a lot of those 1,000 plus Israeli casualties on that day were a result of Israeli fire, either bombing or cannon fire or machine gun fire or whatnot that was directed into crowds, into homes and settlements, for example, where they knew that not only were there Hamas or other Palestinian fighters there, but that there were also Israeli civilians, or in the case of the military base, Israeli soldiers that were going to get killed by their bombs and missiles and shells and bullets. They knew that. They knew what they were doing. And we don't know like who died, how many people were killed by Israel and how many people were killed by Palestinians. But we know that significant numbers of both happened. So anyway, my point is, this is one of many, many, many people who commented in a similar vein. Jewish people who are convinced that the biggest problem in the world today is hatred of Jews. Meanwhile, completely ignoring that, thousands and thousands of Palestinians who've done nothing, done nothing wrong. They're just people, just like these Jewish Americans who haven't, as far as we know, physically harmed anybody. They obviously don't care about physical harm to Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims or whatnot, but as far as we know, they haven't hurt anybody, and they're not any different in that regard from approximately 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, another 3 million or so in the West Bank, another couple of million within official Israeli territory. And this fellow who I showed you the tweet of before, was claiming that he was worried that he might lose his job or something like that as a result of crying in front of a group of complete strangers about the possibility that Jewish people in the United States were going to be physically harmed. And meanwhile, actually a couple of Arab Muslims in the United States, a Palestinian American boy in Chicago, and a Muslim Arab woman in somewhere in Texas, were in fact killed as a result of the uptick in Islamophobia in the United States. And granted, it's possible given the way Israel's been acting, just violence, killing thousands of people, that there might be an uptick in anti-Semitism. That's certainly quite possible and plausible that could happen, but it's nothing compared to the violence that's taking place against Palestinians. And people like the Shea Davidai and dozens of others that I've seen, their narcissism and lack of empathy, just they're terrible human beings. And I'm glad to see they're getting called out to this extent. So poor Shea is getting ratioed big time here. Let's see. Oh, well, no, he got a lot of likes. Never mind. But he did get a lot of pushback as well. So anyway, well, let's look at the bright side of how people are reacting to events in Israel-Palestine. First of all, I should let you know that there's going to be a very big march in Washington, D.C. this Saturday, I believe. I think at about noon. You can look it up on social media. Um, uh, to protest what's happening in Palestine, to protest the um, violence, the genocide, and call for a ceasefire and negotiated settlement where, for instance, hostages are released on both sides, or prisoners, or whatever you want to call them, and a lot of people involved in organizing these protests are Jewish. So let me show you some of that. So Peter Dow, who was until recently campaign manager for Cornell West, is half Jewish. Most people don't know that. They assume he's just Arab because he's from uh, Lebanon. Um, so he's very much on the side of the Palestinian people and says, no, it's not anti-Semitic to condemn genocide against the Palestinian people. Um, Katie Halper is another Jewish American who is very much against the policies of the Israeli government. Um, and she has a great show on YouTube and other social media. Definitely watch it if you haven't before. She says, don't let people say criticizing Israel and standing with Palestinians is anti Semitic. For many Jews, it's central to our Jewish identity. Conflating support for Israel with being Jewish is an anti Semitic trope. In other words, it's stereotyping Jewish people as being Zionists. I stand with these Jews on this issue, and you can too. Please add more. So, Jewish Voice for Peace, the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, uh, if not now, which is an American Jewish peace organization, JFREJ NYC, which is Jews for Racial and Economic Justice in New York City. Miko Peled, who is a Israeli American, born and raised and lived a lot of his adult life in Israel. His grandfather was one of the founders of the state of Israel. His dad was a general in the Israeli military, participated, I believe, in the 1973 war. Eventually became, not exactly an anti-Zionist, but a critic of the Israeli government. And Miko Peled, who also was in the Israeli military, like pretty much every Israeli citizen, is now an outspoken anti-Zionist Israeli American. Um, Norman Finkelstein, you probably know who he is, an American political scientist whose you parents um, were they killed? I think they were killed in the Holocaust. But anyway, they were in concentration camps, and he was as a very young child, I believe. Um, Dr. Gabor Mate, father of YouTube commentator Aaron Mate, and a distinguished doctor and psychiatrist. Um, his parents were Holocaust survivors. Um, I have trouble remembering whether people were killed in the Holocaust or survived the Holocaust, as far as people who had ancestors caught up in it. So, yeah, if I make a mistake, I apologize. So there's Aaron Mate, his son. Um, Medea Benjamin, co-founder of the peace group Code Pink. Max Blumenthal, editor and founder of the Gray Zone News YouTube channel and website. You know, I don't agree with Max on certain issues, but in general, the folks at the Gray Zone, who include Aaron Mate and Anya Parampil and a number of other journalists who they do great work on foreign policy. We'll just leave it at that, and certainly on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So Max is Jewish. Daniel Mate, is that Aaron's brother? I think so. Glenn Greenwald. Again, somebody who I don't necessarily see eye to eye with on every issue. His politics are kind of a mixed bag, but he's very much pro civil liberties and very good on foreign policy, and he's definitely a critic of the Zionist occupation of Palestine. Lee Camp, host of a popular YouTube show, formerly a host of Redacted Tonight on RT, which was canceled. In general, media and social media tried to cancel Lee. Stephen Doninger, a lawyer and activist who's fought against corporate crime quite a bit. Oil companies in South America, for example, served some time in prison and house arrest, not because he did anything wrong, but as punishment for his truth telling and lawsuits about the crimes of, I believe it was Chevron. But anyway, he's a Jewish anti-Zionist. So, some of these folks have organized some really powerful protests against what's been going on. Oh, I forgot to mention Jill Stein, who was not on Katie's list, but we all know who Jill Stein is. She was a medical doctor who ran for president as the Green Party candidate in 2012 and 2016. She says, as a Jew who grew up just after the Holocaust with relatives who, fled pogroms and a grandfather named Israel, I take never again seriously. And that means never again for anyone. Never again is now. We must put an immediate stop to this genocide. So she's making a great point there that, a lot of pro-Israel people, throw out the slogan "Never Again" and talk endlessly about the Holocaust. But to them, "never again" means never again to Jews. They don't seem to care too much about genocides or Holocausts, against other groups of people, which genocide is happening to Palestinians right now. And Jill Stein is doing her best to protest against it. I talked last week about a protest by Jewish Voice for Peace in Washington, D.C. Thousands of people, outside of Congress, and several hundreds went in and interrupted a session of Congress and were arrested for their disruption. And then just a couple of days ago, October 27th, thousands of Jewish people and others opposing the violence in Gaza and Palestine generally held a sit-in at New York's Grand Central Station. So they shut down the hub of the New York City subway station, and hundreds of people were arrested. So they say, like Jill Stein, never again for anyone, and not in our names. In other words, don't we're refusing to allow a genocide to be carried out in our names. Don't conflate being Jewish with being pro-Israel. Just today, Code Pink, Medea Benjamin's organization, also disrupted a congressional hearing where Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was speaking. So let's see what Medea had to say when she led this. Okay, so you can see there, a bunch of other people um, in support of Medea. They're holding up hands with fake blood on them. Uh, saying, you senators have blood on your hands because they unanimously uh, expressed, unconditional support for Israel, refused to talk about having a ceasefire. That includes Bernie Sanders, by the way. There seem to still be a fair number of people who buy into the myth that Bernie Sanders is some sort of progressive or leftist, but he's been terrible on foreign policy for a very long time. He supported the sanctions and bombing of Iraq in the 1990s. He um, supported the war in Afghanistan. He supported the bombing of Yugoslavia. He supported the bombing of Libya. Voted for many military budgets. The list goes on and on and on. He supported the war in Ukraine, and he's now supporting Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank. What the hell did he say the other day? When this was first starting, he said this. Where is it? I absolutely condemn the horrifying attack on Israel by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. There is no justification for this violence, and innocent people on both sides will suffer hugely because of it. It must end now. Okay, I don't know if that's a good Bernie Sanders imitation or not, but anyway, um, completely blaming the violence on October 7th on Hamas. Um, no justification, he says. So that he's claiming it's an unprovoked attack. Nothing happened before. Um, uh, and he was one of 97 senators who voted for a resolution, expressing total support for Israel and supporting its actions and condemning violence by Hamas, but not the violence by Israel. And the other three were just not there. It's not that they didn't support it, because all 100 senators were co-sponsors of the resolution. Okay, so did I not say Noam Chomsky? I thought I said Noam Chomsky. But yes, anonymous Noam Chomsky is you know um, very much against what Israel has been doing in Palestine, and he's been active on this issue since the 1960s, or even maybe farther back. His whole life, pretty adult life, pretty much. So anyway, let's hope this will stop soon, because it's uh, certainly the most horrifying thing we've seen that's gotten much publicity since the Iraq War. What happened in Yemen a while back was pretty awful. Certainly, the civil war in Syria killed a lot of people and caused a lot of destruction. But at the rate this is going, it could get up there. And because we're talking about a deliberate targeting of an ethnic group, it does square with the definition of genocide. So I hope that wherever you are, you will find a way to speak out against the violence that Israel is carrying out, which is not to say that, to the extent that people on the Palestinian side have harmed innocent civilians, particularly if they did so deliberately. That should be condemned too. But let's keep the broader picture in mind and remember that colonial occupiers are the bad guys. People fighting back against colonial occupation are fighting for a just cause, even if they, do some things wrong along the way. There's no such thing as a perfect victim, but the Palestinians are the victims, and Israel is the oppressor in this situation. And we should all do what we can to stand up for Palestinian freedom and to, take action to force our government, the main supporter of Israel, to the tune of several $billion a year for several decades now, out of our tax money, yours and my pocket. We need to do everything we can to force our government to stop it. And if our government stops funding Israeli genocide, then Israel will either have to stop or they'll be defeated militarily. So we can all hope that happens and do what we can to bring it about. All right. Thanks for watching. I will see you hopefully Sunday. Bye now.